Welcome, everybody. This is Jennifer Rigg with the Global Campaign for Education US. We're so delighted that you could join us today. As you can see on the screen, we have a fantastic lineup of presenters and speakers. We know that just last week, we were together celebrating International Literacy Day on the 8th, and then on the 9th, International Day to Protect Education from Attack. And then we're all getting ready for the United Nations General Assembly and the UN Transforming Education Summit starting in just a few short days. So with that in mind, we're really thrilled that you all could join us today as we collaborate across our coalition and our partnership together as we work together towards the right to quality, inclusive education for all. And so we're really thrilled to begin with hearing from our wonderful colleagues at USAID. And you can see that we'll also be hearing from Education Cannot Wait, Sightsavers, and the Global Partnership for Education. And we especially want to hear from all of you. Please do introduce yourselves in the chat box, share your name, your organizational affiliation, if applicable, and where you're zooming in from today. Please let us know if you have any announcements or things that you'd like to share across the coalition, both in terms of your advocacy and your work on education, as well as anything that you're planning for the rest of this month going into October and beyond. I really want to thank the fantastic GCE-US team that's working day and night right now. We know it's extremely busy, and so we're really thrilled to be able to kick off the September coalition meeting and hear from all of you. And so with that, welcome to all. I'm especially delighted that we're going to start off from hearing from Rebeca Martinez, Senior Education Advisor at the Center for Education at USAID. And we're really thrilled with all of the literacy-focused work that Rebeca and her team have been doing at USAID. And we thought, especially this month, it's a great time to hear about everything that's underway, ways that we can together make sure that foundational literacy efforts really are truly universal and reach everyone. And then as we're going into the Transforming Education Summit in a few short days, what USAID and US government's looking at in terms of those opportunities and the fantastic work that's underway on implementing their Global Disability Summit commitments on universal design for learning, literacy for everyone, and the like. So Rebecca, we're so thrilled that you and colleagues could join us today, and we look forward to hearing more. Over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, so much for that introduction, and thank you to GCE for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. I'm really looking forward to speaking a little bit about USAID's continued commitment to ensuring all children and youth have foundational skills and to overall reducing learning poverty. So next slide. So our investments in the education sector are guided really by our policy, which focuses on two key goals: improving learning outcomes and then expanding access to quality basic education for all, particularly the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. And our continued commitment to foundational skills is building on over a decade of work supporting early grade literacy, which has reached to date over 245 million primary learners. And we're going to continue to prioritize investments focused on improving foundational skills, which we've included now numeracy, literacy, as well as social emotional skills. And that's because we know that acquiring these skills is really foundational, not only to future academic success and professional opportunities, but is really the first step in promoting lifelong learning. So looking forward, Congress has introduced the reauthorization of the READ Act, which is our current guidance for how we spend our earmark funding. And this will expire in 2023. Now, the current reauthorization does not include any major revisions and would maintain our focus on increasing equitable access to quality education and improvements in learning and educational outcomes. So expect to keep in line with the work we've been doing. Next slide, please. Of course, COVID has entirely changed the picture, I think, in our sector and has brought us really unprecedented challenges by reversing many of the gains that were made in improving foundational learning over the past decade. We know from a review of 35 studies done by the World Bank on learning loss that found that children experienced an average of half a year during school closures, half a year of learning loss, excuse me. And it's notable that these studies are from only 20 countries, and we still have lots of context where really there's no data available. So we're not sure what we're going to find, but certainly the pattern suggests huge amounts of learning loss. The State of Global Learning Poverty Report, which many of you are probably familiar with, estimated that prior to the pandemic, there were about 57% of teen-year-olds in lower and middle income contexts who were experiencing learning poverty, meaning they could not read and understand a simple text. And estimates are that after the pandemic, due to those school closures and other negative impacts of COVID-19, we're going to see learning poverty rates rise to about 70%. Evidence also suggests, unfortunately, that school closures and the pivot to remote learning had the most negative impacts on those who were already marginalized by socioeconomic factors, race, gender, ability, and geography, among other factors. So, for example, children who were from less advantageous socioeconomic backgrounds were also much less likely to have access to computers, internet, television, or the other mediums that were used for instruction in remote learning. And so in order to address these challenges of overall learning loss and also the growth we see in the inequity gaps, USAID has joined with UNICEF, UNESCO, FCDO, and the World Bank and Gates Foundation in calling for a recommitment to improving foundational learning for all children. Slide, please. So what does that mean, or what is that going to look like? We know that in order to address the challenges presented by the pandemic and the learning loss, we're going to have to really focus our approaches and be strategic. And as part of that, USAID is supporting the RAPID framework, which was put forward by UNICEF, UNESCO, and the World Bank, and which highlights key elements to address in the return to learning. In line with this framework, and as a first step to addressing the challenges posed by the learning crisis, it's really essential that education systems prioritize assessments. And these are assessments that are going to give us data not just on learning loss levels, but also on who are the students who are out of school or who never returned to school or who perhaps didn't start school on time, as well as shedding light on overall teacher and students' well-being. This assessment data is really essential to ensuring that systems and programs can target support to those children who are in the greatest need of additional support, as well as being a tool for monitoring the overall effectiveness of interventions over time. Additionally, programs such as teaching at the right level and other structured pedagogy approaches that rely on differentiated instruction have been shown to be effective in helping catch up students who are not meeting grade level expectations and foundational skills. And these approaches are going to be increasingly important to incorporate and use in classrooms because we know that students are coming back and their learning levels are really all over the place, even if they're in technically the same grade. Alongside these efforts, it's also critical to make instruction more inclusive. We know that the successful implementation of universal design for learning principles are helpful not only to students with disabilities, but really for all children, and are important to making sure that all our educational approaches are more robust in terms of their inclusivity. And also that they address these really widening gaps that we're seeing grow after the pandemic in terms of different groups, in terms of those who are most marginalized falling further behind in their learning. Finally, the importance of including social and emotional skills, I think, cannot be overstated because especially in light of the mental health issues that surfaced during the pandemic. And we know that the overall well-being of teachers and students really should be a primary objective of education programming, and is also essential to ensuring children acquire those other foundational skills. So, next slide, please. So in addressing this learning loss created by COVID-19, it's going to be critical to implement the best practices from the RAPID framework and from what we're learning as we go along about successful remedial education. But USAID is also taking into account the lessons we've learned from our over a decade of work in early grade reading. Although working across a wide variety of contexts, and so nothing is universal, many of our national literacy activities shared some important characteristics in terms of what made them successful in statistically improving learning outcomes. So one trend or one common characteristic is that many of our successful programs, including Kenya's Tusoma activity, Tajikistan's Read With Me activity, and Ghana's early reading activity were iterative in nature. And this means that they built on and used lessons learned from an early pilot or the first few years of activity implementation. And there were significant modifications and changes and adaptations made to the way different parts of the activity were implemented, such as teacher coaching and training, or redesigning the textbooks based on what was learned from those excuse me, initial years or the initial pilot and implementation. So for example, Ghana's early reading activity had multiple phases which built on each other, including instruction in early grade literacy first in local languages, and then having a distance learning program when that became necessary during COVID, and then also having a section that was about transitioning to English. Successful programs also really relied on data and assessments and evaluations that were carried out early on to inform their design. So again, the Ghana Early Reading Activity conducted an extensive landscape assessment, or rather evaluation of the language that teachers were using and that they understood in the classroom compared to the language that their students used and understood. And they found there were significant mismatches in some locations. And again, we're able to use that data to make their implementation of the activity more effective. Also, the importance of monitoring the fidelity of implementation is clear from our experience. One of the key challenges in early activities was the difference between what was written in the activity design and what actually happened on the ground. So understanding where there was these gaps between theory and practice, and then addressing them, as I said earlier, through adaptations and modifications was essential to the improved learning outcomes. Finally, our experience in early grade reading really emphasizes the critical importance of teachers. Teachers need practical training that allows them to develop the skills needed to improve classroom instruction. And we've seen that coaching and mentoring is one of the most effective ways of ensuring behavior change in the classroom. And one of the key challenges in many contexts as we move forward is going to be building teachers' content knowledge and pedagogical skills, as well as design sustainable professional development systems which encourage continuous growth. Next slide, please. So as children and youth return to school, USAID is supporting education systems to focus on improving access to and the quality of education, especially for the most marginalized and vulnerable, because we know that those equity gaps that existed before the pandemic have in many cases grown. We also know, excuse me, as shown from evidence from prior incidents, such as the school closures that resulted from the 2005 Pakistan earthquake, that recuperating the learning loss that happened during the school closures is not going to be a 1 year or a 2-year project, but will take several years. And this means that fully addressing COVID-19 learning losses is going to require a concerted effort among all partners for the near future. Additionally, to ensure our programs focus on the greatest needs, we're going to continue to prioritize assessments and data collection, which can provide insights into where the learning crisis is most severe. Our commitment to inclusive education is also reflected in our pledge to include universal design for learning principles in all of our basic education activity designs by 2026, so that education is truly accessible for all children. And finally, there's an underlying priority, which is focusing on building resilient education systems. We know that unfortunately, COVID is unlikely to be the last crisis that will be faced by schools in many of the contexts where we work, and that new health emergencies, crises caused by climate change or other factors are highly likely to disrupt in-person education. So we're looking to strengthen education systems so that they are ready to meet these future challenges and can provide continuous high-quality instruction for all their students. So that is all. Thank you for your time. And Jennifer, I'll turn it back to you if we're going to do questions now.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your presentation, and to you and your colleagues for all that you're doing. We have a great question to kick off the discussion, thanks to Rachel with UNICEF USA. And I want to encourage everyone to please share your reflections, questions in the chat box as well. And so Rachel says, given that so many countries diverted education funds during the pandemic, how is USAID working with national governments to ensure there's enough budget to cover rapid foundational learning, SEL or social emotional learning, inclusive education, et cetera? Does USAID have a good example of how focusing on all these important elements can be cost effective? All right, thank you, Rachel, for kicking off the discussion, and encourage everyone to also share your questions as well. Rebecca, I know that's not an easy question to answer, so let's discuss together and think of, but I think it's a great opportunity to share what's happening live, if you will, from what you're seeing across USAID programming and partnerships. Over to you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have an example per se yet. I think partially because this is so new, like we're only now incorporating more of these numeracy and social emotional skills into our programming. What I can say is that making sure that we are collecting that data on cost effectiveness and building that into our initial design so we have those answers at the end is something that has really been prioritized and is being pushed forward much more now. So I think, perhaps in early lesson, from the first years of work, one of the challenges was we were doing these things, but we didn't necessarily have that cost effectiveness data. We're collecting that more and more. So one, we do hope to have more of that information to share with our other partners, as well as the countries that we work with in a way that can help them make really effective decisions. Secondly, I would say this is all about partnership. One thing I didn't mention about some of our most effective programs was that they were included funding or worked in alignment with our partners such as FCDO, et cetera. So I think that's going to be part of it as well, is not necessarily doing all of this on our own in every context, because we know, right, that many of our partners and colleagues are already doing this important work. And then, yeah, helping governments have the data that they need to make effective decisions.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And Rose asks if the presentations will be shared with everyone. Yes, we're happy to share. Thanks, Stephanie, for adding in the chat box. The presentation will be sent to everyone that registered for this meeting as well. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. It looks like there's also a comment. Thank you, Jeanette. It might be regarding some of the sort of perspective from in different contexts. So it sounds like there's some lack of clarity on the ground on what subjects USAID works on regarding sustainable development growth. And I'm just quickly scanning. Yes, Jeanette clarified. One issue we could raise is the lack of training for the staff on the ground, specifically when we bring the issues of persons with disabilities. We need more trained staff on the ground. So absolutely, and let me just add to that, would love to learn a little bit more. We're really thrilled about the Universal Design for Learning commitment that USAID has made, and then really using the opportunity this month for International Literacy Day and going into the UN Transforming Education Summit to really talk about that implementation and urge others to be fully incorporating UDL in new education programs as well. So would love to hear more about how that's going, and Jeanette raises such an important point there, which is making sure that there's really strong training for staff, for teachers, support for education support professionals on UDL and inclusive education in particular. So would love to hear more about that, Rebecca, or whoever from USAID you think would be appropriate to respond. Thanks.
Yeah, I can start. And then I did note that my colleague, Josh Josa, is on the phone. I don't know. Hey, Josh, I hate to put you on the spot, but after I'm answered, perhaps you can give a little more insight since you are an inclusive education expert. But I will say that we are, aware that UDL is not something that you can just write into something and then it will happen, right? It's going to require additional capacity development. et cetera. And so one thing that we're doing is really making sure that we work with our colleagues in the missions so that when those designs are being done, they make the appropriate considerations in terms of what needs to be set aside for ensuring that universal design for learning, right, that those implementing have the appropriate training and capacity development. Josh, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, either written. Okay.
And we have a few more minutes for discussion before the next speakers and presenters. And so thanks to Grace as well. It adds to this topic for asking, is it possible to speak more or to share more about how you intend to implement UDL principles in foundational learning and monitor and evaluate this impact? And then Elisa with World Vision says, thanks, Rebeca and Josh. I'm interested in hearing more about UDL as one of the core principles, perhaps going forward. Do you have some examples of resources, toolkits, such as teaching at the right level that USAID is piloting or implementing for us to consider? And thank you, Josh, for writing out your answer with apologies. If it's easier to share some of this after we understand as well. And I think there is a new USAID and Inclusive Development Partners Toolkit on UDL that I believe was just launched last week. So we can make sure that that gets shared out with the resources and the recording from this conversation too. If there are any other resources that people would recommend, please do share.
Yeah, and I would just say, Jennifer, too, you know, that there are other resources that were created by USAID perhaps several years back, so maybe they've been buried or folks may not know that they're there, but we do have a Literacy for All toolkit. We do have guidance on measurement for disability inclusion. That is all on our EduLinks website. So there are resources out there.
Really exciting. Thank you, everybody, for your amazing work on this. And let's keep the discussion going. Please join us in thanking Rebeca, Josh, and everybody at USAID for your fantastic work. And then let's continue to share those resources and answers. And now we're going to also add to this rich discussion our colleagues from Education Cannot Wait, the global fund focused on education in emergencies and protracted crises. We're really thrilled to hear from both Raakhi Williams, the Chief of Strategy and Planning at Education Cannot Wait, or ECW, and Nasser Faqih, the Chief of Partnerships at ECW. We know it's especially busy right now, so we're really delighted to all of you were able to join us today. We're looking forward to hearing about ECW's latest initiatives, updates, and work going into the UN Transforming Education Summit, or TESS, and beyond. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks to the team for having us. We're doing a double act today, so I'm going to talk about the strategic plan, which is definitely the thing I think keeping me up at night at the moment. But it's a real pleasure to sort of have this space to talk about it, because we're actually launching it next week. Our high-level steering group will be launching it, and that's chaired by Gordon Brown, the UN Special Envoy. And well, we hope that you will think it's bold. I think it's been a very collective effort to produce it. We've tried to really have a consultative approach, including through a multi-language survey with the sector. And I think at the forefront of our mind in producing this new 4-year plan has been those 222 million children who we now know we can quantify that there are 222 million crisis-affected children in need of educational support. So I think we are hearing, you know, their sort of challenge implicitly to go faster and further, and our plan is a response to that challenge. So this slide really summarizes the key elements of the plan, and particularly the top half of the slide is a summary of our new theory of change. So I'll just talk through that first. The title, as you can see, includes the words "a new way of working," and I think that's because we absolutely haven't lost sight as we develop the plan of our origins. We were born in 2016 as an organization at the World Humanitarian Summit, very much, I think, with the mandate or baton to really think about bridging the humanitarian and development divide. And I think we feel continually that, you know, the onus on doing that and championing a new way of working in the way we do business. In terms of our results for children and adolescents, our new research, which has helped arrive at the figure of 222 million children in need of educational support, also shows that close to 120 million of them, crisis-affected children, are in school but not achieving minimum proficiency in reading and mathematics, which is obviously desperately saddening. And at the same time, obviously, we know that a more rounded approach to developing any learner's mind, body, spirit is absolutely necessary and good practice. So that's why we've very much placed learning access and holistic learning at the center and top of our agenda for the next 4 years. And then finally, on the strategic objectives, as part of our theory of change, we very much want to maintain an eagle-eyed focus on global financing, but at the same time build systemic change across the education emergencies, protected crisis, EPC sector. And I'll say more about that later, but I think very much that's where we see ECW's role as a unique global fund in this space. So let me just touch on the bottom left of the slide now, which is the how we'll deliver this plan and our ambition. I think we feel that we have a clear global value add and advocacy, and I hope some of you follow us on Twitter, etc. And our 222 Million Dreams campaign, I think, is a perfect example of how we've combined networks, research, communication to produce new data that actually can help the sector move forward and really target. And if you're interested, the campaign is it's just hashtag 222 million dreams. So please do sign up for updates, and it's been endorsed by a number of key entities and leaders globally. On research mobilization, Nasser will say more, but effectively our plan is being launched alongside a case for investment. So last year, over the last strategic period, we raised as an organization 1.1 billion, and our new ambition is 1.5 billion. And the plan is clear that it's about growing our own trust fund to reach children, and adolescents directly through our own programming as ECW, but it's also about our role on systemic change, growing the pie for the entire sector. And then in terms of programming, so our new plan is aiming to reach 20 million children and adolescents. That's quite a big step up from our first 6 years or so when we reached 7 million. So we've definitely, we felt that we've sort of embedded ourselves in the sector. We've got our learning. We have 3 investment windows which are working well. And a lot, those 20 million children will be reached primarily through our first emergency response window, which we call our FER, F-E-R, which is very much about sudden onset crises. And 12 million will be reached through the FERS, and then 8 million will be reached through our multi-year resilience program. So those are longer term, multi-year nexus championing programs, again, globally. And then finally, in terms of the how, I think global convening is a particularly exciting part, I think, of the how. And one of the big value adds, I think, of the new plan is the launch that we're intending of a sort of a new financing observatory. So I think we feel at the moment that global payers are hindered by an overly complex funding landscape and a siloed working approach. So we're going to invest in efforts to generate, share, and use EIPC financing data more effectively. And the idea is that this observatory will produce timely, transparent, harmonized, high quality data that everyone can use on EIPC financing. So we'll have a sense of financing flows, operational effectiveness, etc. And on global public goods, that's something that we feel it's sort of in our DNA to support that. So for example, we've been supporting over the last few years the global education cluster to build its own capacity and coordination ability. And also, for example, the Global Coalition to Prevent Education from Attack, these really important bodies that provide global public goods for the entire sector. And that's all funded through our 3rd investment window. I will end by just saying something very briefly on what's new. I think climate, you'll see when you read the plan, new ambitions on climate. We haven't done so much on climate during our sort of first 6 years of existence, but definitely now you'll be seeing it mainstreamed across all our programs with really specific ways in which we'll do that. Localization, we're setting ourselves more ambitious year-on-year targets to fund a greater proportion of local actors through our work. And you'll also see, for example, with our first emergency response, you'll see that increasing in size. So it will become 25% of all our funding, because we recognize that, you know, those are particularly effective, and with our multi-year resilience programs, we'll be fine-tuning them and really placing holistic learning at the heart of investments, and actually measuring that, which is complicated for a raft of reasons. I will stop there. That's a very speedy, brief overview of the plan, but I hope it gives you all a flavor. But I should, end by saying that the plan can only be delivered without financing. And so that's why we are launching it alongside the case for investment. So I will now happily hand over to my colleague Nasser to tell you all about our resource mobilization ambitions.
Thanks, Raakhi. Thanks, Jennifer and the group for organizing this very important meeting. I think having this space to catch up and to update is very important. As Raakhi mentioned, we now with the strategy heading to its approval, hopefully during UNGA, I think the discussions afterwards would be more focused on how many of these investments will be delivered on the ground. And I think this would be a good time and space to discuss also with you and with a larger group of civil society and government partners how this approach will happen on the ground. And I think this is when probably we should have another discussion like this one today with some of our colleagues from education and some of our colleagues from the research team, so that we can discuss a little bit with you more on the technical approach of how these results will be achieved on the ground. Like Raakhi mentioned, first of all, let me thank you and thank all the coalitions, actually all the chapters throughout the world for their amazing support to us since we've launched our recent campaign. The discussions and how they are unfolding in the different countries, I think, show the eagerness, show the high level of commitment from different governments to make sure that EIE and funding for EIE and protracted crisis does not get marginalized during these hard economic times. And specifically on the coalition in the US, I think what you guys have done, bringing many of the partners on board has been remarkable. Your latest discussions, trying to also facilitate the engagement from the US government has been remarkable. And we very much hope that this continued leadership of the US government in financing ECW will also feature strongly in the new strategic plan. I want to tell our USAID colleagues that you'll also be seeing your support to ECW and how you are also influencing the different approaches that ECW is doing in this field and area, and we very much look forward to that, to show that technical complementarity between what you're doing bilaterally and what we're doing through the fund. On the replenishment side, now we have the test coming up, we have the UNGA coming up. We don't have any specific ECW events organized at the test. What we've done this year around, we decided that we will have the high-level steering group meeting, which is our high-level meeting to launch the strategy, and with it to launch a case for investment. And we decided that we will be engaging in many of the different events happening, side events, but also core events happening around the test to promote more this vision of supporting EIE and not leaving these children caught in crisis behind while we discuss the larger education crisis. So I think we will be doing that. Yasmin will be engaged along with the senior colleagues in ECW in presentations, in talks, including the heads of states discussions and the ministerial consultations to ensure that we have solid commitments to EIE in this larger test agenda. We will of course be also participating through some of the side events that are organized also by civil society, including the Global Citizen Festival, which will be happening by the end of the UNGA week, to hopefully bring also yet another moment of solidarity and support for EIE. The main ECW activity will, in terms of event, will happen in February 2023. So once we launch the strategy, we launch Showcase for Investment around September, we will begin together with you a very assertive campaign at the global level. And we want your continued engagement in this campaign to build up to a replenishment event that will happen on the 16th and the 17th of February. We will have 2 days in Geneva. The replenishment event will be co-hosted by ECW and the Swiss government, but will also be co-convened by the government of Germany, the government of Niger, South Sudan. We're also trying to get Colombia also on board, and the government of Norway. So these partners will come together, and we will have a one-day high-level day to bring some of the principals and some of the main donors to make their announcements. But then we don't want it to also only be a day when donors come and pledge. We also want it to be a forum for discussing some of the latest thoughts and latest ideas of how we can advance EIE. So the second day will be a more in-depth day to look at some of the solutions we can have in relation to displacement, in relation to disability, climate change, and many of the issues that Raakhi highlighted as a priority for the new strategy. So it's going to be a very eventful, I think, 3-4 months to come, with a lot of focus on EIE. We are very happy to see the impact of the advocacy we've done in Paris, along with you at the pre-test. We see that EIE is now something now that cannot be just put at the margin. It's something that has to be really at the core, at the center of the discussions. And I think the report that we've released together with also your help and your participation back in June on the 222 million children also puts that in perspective. So it's not a small issue at the margin that we're addressing here. It's really at the core of things. For the civil, I see a comment now coming up on a civil society meeting in New York. Indeed, this was proposed to us. We are still in discussion to see if we can identify appropriate time. Hopefully we'll have some answer on this week, early this week, so that we can secure at least a meeting between Yasmin, Gordon Brown, some of the high-level steering group members and civil society members in New York. Let me stop here and allow time for questions. Again, thank you for all your support. I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of influence that you are able to generate all around the world, and we look forward to strengthen also that collaboration with the coalition, in particular at the global level. Over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And yes, please keep us posted. We know some people are already traveling to New York. And so if it is possible to hold a meeting with civil society, that would be great. World Vision is going to be hosting after tests, and we'll share those details as soon as it's available. An education and emergencies focused engine room discussion, I believe on the 21st. So hold that date as a way to then debrief on what does get accomplished through tests and the like, and be planning moving forward, really getting ready for that replenishment in February and the like as well. And we have one question that's come in quickly. Just wanted, with apologies, I don't know if US government colleagues are still on the line, but to our ECW friends, it sounds like an amazing group of governments that are going to be working together to host the February high-level financing conference and replenishment. And we just weren't sure what the status was of if it might be, again, apologies if maybe there are more discussions happening behind the scenes on this already, but as civil society partners, there's a question about if US government would be able to be part of that or contribute as one of those co-sponsors as well, what the current status is on that. Thank you.
So this question, should I go ahead and at least share with you what I know?
Please, that would be great. Thank you.
No, brilliant. Absolutely. I mean, the US government has offered a different type of leadership. I think in terms of co-financing, co-sponsoring the main event, they have expressed their full support to it, but they will not be specifically a co-sponsor or a co-host for the replenishment. However, the USAID has come very strongly on a commitment to support bring more private sector for the replenishment. And right now we are going through critical discussions with many colleagues in Washington to see how can we use the ECW platform to attract more civil society in support of education in emergency. And the US is the one leading this. And they're inspiring this through their previous engagement with LEGO, but also with their engagement with many of the private sector leaders in the US. I think in addition to that, the US is going to be strongly present through their historical and hopefully continued future contribution into ECW, which is a big chunk actually of the funds we receive, although they are sometimes committed on year-by-year basis, so it doesn't come out showing like a very large pledge compared maybe to some of the donors who pledge multi-year commitments to ECW. But nonetheless, the contribution from the US is very significant, but it comes fragmented throughout the strategic cycle period. Perhaps one idea for us to explore together for this year is to see how can we politically show that magnitude of support through a multi-year commitment to ECW. But these are things that we are waiting to discuss when time is right with our colleagues in the US government. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful update. Really appreciate that. And just quickly, one question came in about what do you mean by private sector, if that's foundations or corporations? And then Rebecca, we know that you and other colleagues are working on this. So if you wanted to come in, you would be more than welcome.
So in terms of the private sector, I think we're looking at all private sector without discrimination at this stage, but we're also looking for the additionality. So many of the foundations that are already known and committed to education, I mean, we are very happy to engage with them to see how we can maybe scale up some of their contributions to EIE. But I think the idea is how do we make noise for EIE and protracted crisis in some of the markets and some of the audiences that are not engaged right now with us around the table. And we're looking here at private sector who has not been engaging previously on education. And can we use some of the political weight that we have with the engagement of the US government to, for example, an advocate like Yasmin, an advocate like many of your leaders in the coalition, we are speaking in a way to the same already converted group of supporters to education. But perhaps if we are able to speak in new circles in relation to Wall Street or Silicon Valley or some of the other very wealthy business communities, maybe we can tap into new resources, additional resources. So I think that's where our interest is, at least as ECW, is where can this additionality be for ECW rather than going to some of the already converted and basically shifting funds around. We don't want to shift funds around. Thanks.
Jennifer, I don't have much to add to that. As you noted, our engagement at TESS is not only USAID, but USG wide. So certainly some of those discussions are happening across the sectors, and or agencies, and I'm not as well as aware of what they're deciding. But just to say, we continue to realize that private sector partners will be important in many of these contexts because the funding is just not enough.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Nasser. We really appreciate it. And adding to this very rich discussion, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Krista, to introduce our next speaker, and let's continue if there's any further discussion points, questions, et cetera, in the chat box. We're so grateful to our colleagues from US government and ECW. Over to you, Krista.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for actively participating today. As Jennifer said, please continue the engagement in the chat and in the lead up to TESS and beyond. I'm so pleased to introduce Mariana Rudge, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for Social Inclusion and Education at Sightsavers, to speak a bit about the advocacy for inclusive education that's been going on, that Sightsavers has really been actively leading in the lead up to the Transforming Education Summit. I'll go ahead and share my screen and hand over to Mariana. Just one second. Hope this is visible. Can you hear us, Mariana? Hello?
We know on occasion, even with technology checks, sometimes the mute and the like just isn't working on our end. So Mariana, feel free to reach out to us in the chat or whatever we can do to help. Krista, maybe, is it possible to go to our next speaker while we're sorting that out?
Is Raphaëlle on? I know the presentation was scheduled to start at 10.
Okay, no problem. So while we're figuring that out, Meg shared in the chat, thank you for continuing the discussion. Is there a challenge, though, about the strategic focus on education as a public good to include private sector organizations to have a significant role in framing educational interventions in crisis areas? Is there a risk of privatizing access to the public good of, for example, foundational literacy and numeracy? I hope these concerns will be taken into account. So thank you for your important comment there, Meg. Absolutely, if anybody wants to respond, you're welcome to do that. We're hoping that our colleague Mariana will be able to come in shortly. And if not, we can help go through the points for Sightsavers so that everybody knows about this fantastic campaign. Krista, do you want to go ahead and put the slides up again? And while Mariana is, I think, rejoining. Yep, it looks like she's just coming back. Yeah, thank you. And we can share as well in the chat box. Stephanie, if you might be able to share, there's a wonderful guide for everybody from Sightsavers about this, this campaign. If any of you are new to it, you haven't seen it yet, it's multi-day. So there's an opportunity to adapt the messaging and really help now in terms of a mobilization drumbeat through the Transforming Education Summit. All right, so what we'll do is we'll quickly go through those slides. Thanks, Krista. If we can make sure somebody else reaches it directly out to Mariana to help her troubleshoot. Thank you so much. Perfect. So the Advocacy for Inclusive Education at TESS, or the Transforming Education Summit, as we said, from Sightsavers, is a really fantastic campaign. Next slide, please. And so this is an opportunity specifically to help implement Sustainable Development Goal 4 and really make sure we're together reaching the 240 million children with disabilities around the world. You can see here some of the statistics. We've been talking about during COVID, 31% of children unable to benefit from digital learning, and 16% being less likely to read or to be read to at home, 42% less likely to have foundational reading and numeracy skills, and 49% more likely to never have attended school. So the need is greater than ever. Next slide, please. And so we'd love to hear from you all if any of you or your partners have been participating in the national consultations as part of the UN Transforming Education Summit, and what your experience has been, how inclusive they've been of people with disabilities and organizations of people with disabilities as well. Many of you know that there have been 5 action tracks writ large as part of TESS. And so thematic action track number 1 covers a lot of different areas: inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy schools. The pre-summit for TESS in June, there were a lot of concerns about very few mentions of disability inclusive education, and in particular, some of a lot of the sessions themselves were not actually inclusive, right? In terms of making sure that people could even get access to participate. And thank you, Rachel, for sharing the hashtag for this campaign in the chat of do your homework. It looks like Mariana is on the line.
Yes, so Mariana, feel free to come in.
I'm really
We were
sorry.
just trying to help. Oh, beautiful. We can hear you now. No worries. We know that happens sometimes. If it's okay, we just went ahead and got started to start
That's
sharing
great.
this great work that
Yeah.
you all have been doing. So over to
Of
you.
course. No, thank you. I'm sorry. My Zoom decided to update as I pressed unmute, but I'm glad you've been involved, Jennifer, so you could cover it for me as well. That's really good. So yeah, we just wanted to share a little bit about the work we've been doing on inclusive education, because I'm not sure how much, you probably shared all the stats already, right, Jennifer? But as Rebecca was sharing earlier, we know children behind before COVID impacted and school closures and all of that. So we feel that if we are thinking about a future of education and a vision for that, unless it's an inclusive system, unless we're building more inclusive education systems, then we're going to leave 240 million children with disabilities behind. So we've been engaging as Sightsavers, but also working closely with GCE and other partners to try to engage with the preparatory process for the test. We know there were lots of we found it really hard to find information about those and to get our partners in country to engage. So we don't know how inclusive those have been of people with disabilities and OPDs, and we're still waiting to see some of the reports from national level and also the national commitments. And we're really hoping that there are commitments to inclusive education within those national commitments. Quite a few organizations have engaged with thematic action track 1 in particular, which was about inclusive, equitable, safe and healthy schools. And the paper with recommendations from that action track is really good and really strong. But some of us felt that inclusive education wasn't being mainstreamed enough across all the different tracks, and that we needed a bit more of a concerted effort to make sure that it was being taken seriously in all the different preparations and avenues for the test, because there were lots of webinars, lots of consultations. Not all of them were accessible to people with disabilities, not all the documents were accessible to people with disabilities. So as some of us joined the pre-summit in Paris, we sort of thought that we would need a more concerted effort to make that happen in practice. So we had launched a joint call to action as the International Disability and Development Consortium, the International Disability Alliance, GLAD and GCE, just with 6 main asks that actually link back to the action tracks with key recommendations around how do you make education systems more inclusive. And then based on that, we have actually done some joint advocacy. So in addition to what we were already doing as individual organizations, we have all sent joint letters to the senior advisor to the test, Nana Garnier, to the Secretary General and others involved in the test, just to make sure that the Secretary General's vision for the future of education is inclusive, that the outcomes of the leaders they are inclusive, that countries that are meeting their commitments to education also include children with disabilities in their thinking. And then as the latest effort around that, we created the social media campaign called Do Your Homework. It is based on the main asks from the IDDC commitment. And it has 6 main pieces of homework for all the leaders. Jennifer, can I just make sure that you can hear me?
Once the sound is going in and out a little bit, if you're able to speak a little closer to the microphone, that might help. But thank you. Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, because it has frozen again, so I may disappear. I don't know, my Zoom seems to want to update again. I'm really sorry if you could continue if I disappear, but I cannot seem to see my screen or anything.
Oh goodness. We can
would you mind,
we can
would
hear
you mind
you,
reading through the 6 pieces of homework, just because I cannot see the slides anymore?
Of course, and we'll move to that slide.
I'm very sorry.
On the yeah, no problem. Let's make it. I know tech checks only take us so far. So there's design homework, sociology homework, computing homework, math, economics, and politics. And so different aspects, and we've shared in the chat the direct link that people can take to the Sightsavers website for the Do Your Homework. And Stephanie's also shared the partner pack toolkit and pack as well. Hope that helps, Mariana. And like Rachel said in the chat, Do Your Homework is the hashtag for this campaign. And people are also using Transforming Education for things related to the Transforming Education Summit itself. If there are others that people are using, I think our colleagues at Their World and UN Foundation have been quite active on social media, and there are a variety of social media toolkits available in the lead up to tests as well. Mariana, if you'd like, we can go to the next slide on how you can help. So we've covered if there's anything that would be helpful to say about how people can create their own piece of homework as well. And we really want all of you to get involved and make this fit for your messaging. Anything else, Mariana, that would be good to highlight?
I think we have lost her again, so I appreciate
okay.
you
Thanks,
covering
Krista.
Yeah.
No problem. Okay, so the next slide then takes us to a really exciting event that many of us are collaborating on. We're really grateful to USAID. We hope ECW will be able to join as a speaker. We'll hear from our colleagues at GPE next on the great work they're doing as well. But for Solutions Day, this coming Saturday, the 17th of September, as part of TESS, this joint event will focus on inclusive, equitable, quality education and transforming commitments into real solutions for disability inclusive education. So please do join us in room 7 at the 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern time slot. We know it's going to be a very busy day. We did just get confirmation from the UN this morning that it will also be live streamed on UN Web TV, which is great. So if you have colleagues that will be in New York at TESS Solutions Day, please come in person and help spread the word. And then also people are all welcome to join in through that live stream as well. And then the next slide gives a thank you and points of contact for our wonderful colleagues at Sightsavers. Mariana and her fantastic campaign and communications team has just done such great work getting this ready. So let us know if there are any questions about this, please. And I know time is short. So Krista, would you like to help move us into the next portion of the conversation? I think Raphaëlle Martinez will be joining us shortly, who's the team lead from Global Partnership for Education on education policy and learning.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for bearing with us. I believe Raphaëlle is on the call. Can you hear us, Raphaëlle?
I am, and can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you well. Over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be joining you. Is it my turn? Sorry, I just connected.
Yes, we're so glad you could join. Welcome. We're really delighted that we've been talking about plans for TESS for the UN Transforming Education Summit. And also we'd love to learn more about the great work that GPE is doing to address literacy and numeracy in honor of International Literacy Day just a few short days ago. Over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, well, I'm very happy to be with all of you today. I mean, especially as we're celebrating international literacy these days, because we know the situation is worsening. And today, the ratio of children aged 10 who are in school but unable to read and understand a simple sentence has increased to 70% globally, up from 57% before the pandemic. And in most GP partner countries, it was even like way above 80% before the pandemic. So we know that the pandemic had a terrible effect on learning levels that were already very low before, and that the losses would continue to accelerate. And if nothing is done, this generation would potentially lose trillions of dollars in potential lifetime earnings. We also know through the recent UNDP Human Development Report that 9 out of 10 countries have retrograded in terms of Human Development Index in the last 2 years. So what that means is that life expectancy, economic prosperity, and education have declined. While we know that education is critical to build prosperous, healthy, green, and fair societies. So that's why The Transformative Education Summit called by the UN Secretary General could not come at a more opportune time to mobilize ambition and action around the world to address this crisis. And in GP, we see the summit as an opportunity to make education a priority at the highest level and to hold the world accountable for urgent progress. So GP, we've been engaged across the 5 action tracks in providing technical contributions, but also by mobilizing our partners and networks to make sure that the consultation process is inclusive and reflective of the many voices of our partnership. And we had a very, very important participation of the civil society in the different consultations that we organized as part of the action tracks. We're also the co-technical anchors of the action track 5 with the World Bank. The action track 5 is on education finance, and we've been working very closely with the CSOs, but in particular GCE, who's I think the terminology is the leading stakeholder of the action track 5, to secure national and international commitments to devote more resources to education. But I mean, not only more resources, because that would not be sufficient. And I think that's the discussion paper of Action Track 5 that speaks for it quite eloquently, which says that they have to be spent in more equitable and efficient ways. And that paper had been very much built with the support of the CSO's direct inputs. We're still working all together to eventually come out with what we're calling a global financing compact for education. So far at the TESS, what will be presented is going to be a call to action like the other action tracks, but we really hope that the call to action of that action track 5 will develop into a global financing compact, and we're hoping that the civil society will continue shaping it with us, advocating for it, and also holding the international community and the local actors accountable for what we hope are going to be tangible action and progress. Ahead, well, in the lead up of the actual summit, at the pre-summit in Paris in June 2022, we've also organized a roundtable of education ministers that were representing more than 80 partner countries of the Global Partnership for Education. And they issued a ministerial communiqué on transforming education at scale. So, for instance, they've called on head of states and governments attending the TESS, the summit, to invite new signatories to endorse the head of state call to action on education finance that we launched at the Global Summit for Education. That was a replenishment event of GP, and that's a way of expressing head of state's commitment to prioritize, protect and increase education expenditure in national budget. And that is not possible without the support of the civil society as well, for advocating not only for signing the head of state's call to action, but also for monitoring that the commitments are turned into action. But they also, for instance, encourage member states to implement policies that ensure that the financing reaches the most marginalized girls and boys, and to ensure that the use of the resources is efficient. They also call on external actors to align around national priorities and to work in ways that leverage domestic investments in education and increase fiscal space, paying special attention to debt relief mechanisms, for instance, because we know that the debt burden is increasing on countries, and that they need support from different actors to increase the fiscal space and eventually being able to invest more in education out of their own domestic resources. Well, TESS for us is also the moment when we're going to celebrate the 20 years of GPE. For all these years, we've been focusing on delivering transformative change for children by convening partners, because we're a partnership, mobilizing funds, but also catalyzing reforms to build equitable, inclusive, and resilient education systems that are fit for the 21st century. And since GP opened its doors nearly 20 years ago now, 160 million more children are in school in our partner countries, including twice as many girls as before. Practically, what we're going to do in TESS, in New York, in a few days, we will be taking part in many events. We will be co-organizing a lot of events during the Solutions Day with different partners and member states, but we're also going to take an active part into the Youth-led Mobilization Day. And finally, for the TESS Leaders Days, we're going to be represented by our chair, vice chair, acting CEO. So that's for our footprint of a TESS. And again, we're a partnership, so it's not like the Secretariat in DC and Paris and Brussels, but it's really all of our partners working together and making GP's footprint important as like advocating for more equitable systems. And so as part of that, one important actor is the civil society. And so I would want to conclude in highlighting that critical role that the civil society plays in supporting the implementation of our new strategy and operating model. So the civil society in our model is essential because it's an active actor into strengthening inclusive sector dialogue and also national capacities for systems transformation. And the national education coalitions in particular, they play a critical role in complementing education monitoring systems. So that's also the accountability system because they do provide important evidence from the most marginalized communities, the most difficult to reach communities. And that really helps building a stronger accountability of the different partners, the governments, of course, but really all of the operators of an education system that should be delivering quality education and learning to their children. And also we have, we support directly the civil society, GP, through our program, GP's Education Out Loud, which is one of the largest education, if not the largest education advocacy and social accountability funds that directly support civil society organization in more than 60 countries. So it's really about strengthening their capacity, their own capacities of the CSOs for influencing education policies and making sure that the education systems are resilient, but also responsive to the needs of the communities. So GP really counts on the civil society to keep pushing for the bold reforms, the systems approach that we're taking, the systems transformation that we're all hoping at international level, including at TESS, at the summit. Because, we believe that now is time to take bold reforms that would radically accelerate progress in education to the benefits and hopefully large-scale benefits of the most marginalized children. And that really requires ambition and also a lot of alignment of all of the different elements of an education system, but more easily in some ways, because we have a direct effect on that, on an alignment of the different actors of the system, that we all work in the same direction and that we are able to align our resources to support the bold reform and transformative reform that countries need for addressing the learning crisis. Voilà, and I'm probably too long, but I'm happy to take questions if any.
That was super helpful. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And there is a question that has come in the chat. Thank you for that. Specifically asking how are illiterate young adults who are also mothers taken into account in GPE's work? In Africa, 40% of women are illiterate, and of course it influences a lot issues related to education for young girls, adolescent girls, and the like. So thank you for the question, and if there are other discussion points or questions, please let us know. Raphaëlle, the second one that I'll just mention is our colleagues at ECW kindly mentioned that they're looking, we know it will be extremely busy with people who are in New York around TESS and UNGA and the like, but that ECW might be doing a civil society meeting there. We weren't sure if GPE is planning anything similarly or what you would recommend for civil society partners to engage in the great work that you mentioned. I believe that the CSO1 constituency, sorry for the jargon, but that's, like you were mentioning, that's one of those key constituencies that make up the GPE board and governance structure. But if anybody will be there in person this coming Sunday, I think that constituency will be doing a meeting of international NGOs and the like, and we can share in the chat our point of contact for RSVPing to that for civil society partners who might have interest in joining. It's our colleague Nafisa at Light for the World. And we'd welcome everybody else sharing any other announcements or events. Raphaëlle, great to hear the different places where GPE plans to be involved. If there are any pieces there that you can share with civil society, or any commitments or announceables that might be coming up that will help people to plan to be supportive on communications and social media and the like. So that was a couple of different questions that are on people's minds, but starting with the really critical point that that was raised in the chat about reaching illiterate young adults and mothers in Africa. Thank you.
Well, thanks again for all of the great questions. Jennifer, you would remind me if I'm just forgetting some of them. So, I mean, you would know, right, that GP is mainly about basic education, but in an extended way, because now we're also calling for 12 years of education. So I can give you numbers, for instance, because that's an exercise that we've been conducted in the past and that we are still like building as we have our new strategy. But for the past strategy that was running until 2020, literacy learning, including literacy instruction, not only, but inclusive of it, was the biggest investment area for us. So it was 775 million, which basically represents 36% of our total amount of GP implemented grants. So we do care a lot about literacy instruction. And as you may hear in my background, actually, there is literacy happening with my kids doing their homework. So I'm hoping that you're all good with that. So, yeah, you can hear me well, right? Okay, good. But there's like different examples. For instance, I mean, I can just like just cite off the top of my head, but in Lao PDR, for instance, we supported a reading readiness program to build children's competency in early literacy. So it's more like foundational skills and foundational learning. In Zimbabwe, we've been supporting as well an early reading initiative, which targets grades 1 and 2 children with the view to maximize quality learning outcomes, for instance. So we're definitely paying attention to girls and women because we have that priority, which is a very hardwired with everything that we're doing. Sorry, 1 second. And so in everything that we're doing, we are considering gender as a cross-cutting priority. So we have differentiated strategies for girls and boys, depending on what are the exact bottlenecks that they're meeting into getting literate, getting to school, being able to learn in a safe environment and everything. So we do also consider the social norms, the cultural social norms, and how it would take to use education to make a society more equitable in terms of gender equality for sure, but also giving more opportunities to boys and girls to fulfill their potential. For the other question, so I'm sorry that I'm not answering about the youth program that are more into non-formal education, but for the formal and basic education and above the junior secondary and above, we do have literacy as and numeracy actually as our biggest investment. The other question I think about the agenda that we have in with TESS. For the solutions, that we're going to issue a blog very soon. So I'm going to make sure that it comes to you and you will have the different events. I can speak a little bit more eloquently, I hope, for the events that I'm co-organizing because I'm the technical anchor on education finance questions. So there will be one panel on solutions day in the morning that will be discussing the discussion paper and also trying to get ourselves organized so we can issue that global compact, global financing compact for education. That's definitely an important one, and we're hoping that the civil society will be here for exchanging with us. There is another one that we're also co-organizing with Education Above All and Qatar and the World Bank, that will more look at the innovative ways of mobilizing finance, including through debt relief mechanisms, because, and I'm not sure whether I've said that, but our ministers, when they met at the pre-summit, they really called quite boldly on GP to help them deal with the debt crisis and see what we can do in terms of debt relief mechanism when it comes to education, because it's kind of, I mean, I wouldn't say standard, but it's well spread in other sectors, health in particular, but education is a little bit lagging behind when it comes to work with partners and the governments in particular, but with the Ministry of Finance really to create that fiscal space. And so for Sanda, I think that's, I mean, if it's open to GP, I'm sure that we would be happy to have a representative attending it. Yeah, I'm not sure whether that was a question for me there.
Thank you so much for sharing that information. And absolutely, I think people would find it valuable to find out where GPE and others are going to be active in New York this week and next, and ways that people can join and participate both in person and for those that are trying to join virtually. A question and a comment just came in, and then we'll move to announcements. Steve Cleese says, thank you, and a comment, in terms of tests, we desperately need to transform education in multiple ways, but we don't see much transformational happening. We are so far from achieving SDG 4. We are so focused on foundational skills when they can be taught with any content. We need to focus education on climate change, on understanding and doing something about poverty and inequality, on social emotional learning, on lessening violence, on so much more. And we need to see change to adequately finance education and all the SDGs. Thank you, Steve, for sharing that perspective from University of Maryland. And Steve does a lot of important work as we're thinking big picture on what it really takes to transform education. Raphaëlle, you're welcome to respond if you'd like to that, and thank you for sharing those comments to everybody that's responding in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I mean, I think we all share that concern that we really don't want the summit to end up being just like one more talk show, and making sure that there is actual actions being taken. And I think the UN office is working quite hard. I mean, we don't have the information just yet, but I know that they're working for making some announcement about tangible action that may be taken. And I think, I mean, that's my personal perspective. It's not GP perspective, but I would say that it's probably after the summit that the work is even more important, and having the right monitoring system in place so we can hold each other accountable for what we have been promising or committed to at the summit. So that's one thing. And I think, yeah, that pressure on having the right monitoring mechanism and involving the civil society in the right way is going to be critical for making sure that things are being implemented. Because, I mean, even that discussion paper on finance, for instance, if I'm totally honest, there is nothing very new. We've been discussing a lot of that for the past years. What is missing right now is critical action. So I'm hoping that building that movement and that momentum of and that movement of actors will lead to tangible action that will have to be monitored and having everyone accountable for that. And there is that other comment, I mean, like I'm building on the other part of your comment, Steve, which, I mean, we would agree as well that, I mean, education shouldn't be taken in silo and is the building block of many other SDG challenges, but we also benefit from development in the other SDGs. So, I mean, at least in GP, we're trying more and more to open the space and the way that we are thinking, and through that systems lens and systems approach to get like a bit further than the actual sector itself, and having a systems lens by integrating components, thinking, actors, resources from the other sectors, and making sure that eventually we're building together. And I think, I mean, like an equitable, fairer society that would be respectful of our environment. I think that's that change of paradigm where we have to make sure that globally now we're all concerned about having fair and green societies.
Thank you so much for your thoughtful response, and apologies for all the plethora of links for announcements. We see a general question from Rose, which is really important. Does anyone know if they have sent out acceptance letters for tests in terms of people's requests and expressions of interest to be able to join? Stephanie, do you mind sharing? We can point people to the email addresses for the different aspects of the test secretariat. With apologies, we know that they are extremely busy. So if other people have other suggestions, please let us know. And then for announcements, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Krista. And Krista, please answer for Rachel as well, the great question about the deadline for both the OMB and conference letters. The OMB letter for fiscal year 2024, people should add their organizational name and we'll update it on a rolling basis. And then over to you, Krista, on the conference letter that is for fiscal year 2023 that's underway. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thank you, Rachel, for the question. The conference letter is open to red line edits until this Friday, and then we're also doing sign-on. So you can sign on and do red line edits at the same time, and we'll issue another call for sign-ons following that. So first of all, thank you so much to everyone who's been actively engaging with us in discussions around the Transforming Education Summit. Not very much time left leading up to it now, only a week away here. So please do let us know if you plan to attend. We'd love to engage with you, and really exciting to hear about the many plans that are in the works. As Jennifer just mentioned, and thanks to both Rachel and Jennifer for mentioning it, we developed a fiscal year 2024 letter to the Office of Management and Budget. That was already sent, but we are collecting signatures on a rolling basis. We can put the link to the finalized version that's on our website in the chat for you to see it. And then there's also a call to update or to add red line edits and sign on to the FY23 conference letter as we work to finalize the full bill. To let you know, we wanted to inform you that our next Inclusive Education and Early Childhood Community Practice meeting that Stephanie is leading will take place on October 6th at 9 a.m. We'll put the link to register in the chat. Please go ahead and sign up so it's on your calendars. And then looking ahead for after tests, after the Transforming Education Summit, we're looking to hold in another Global Campaign for Education US coalition meeting on the 17th of October. And this will have a focus on girls' education, really looking at and highlighting International Day of the Girl, which was the previous week. But please let us know if your organization is doing any work, especially to support girls, or on literacy initiatives and resources that you'd like to share. We'd love to have you join us as a speaker, so please do email us if that is of interest. And we would also like to highlight any blogs or resources that your organization is developing in the lead up to International Day of the Girl, as well as literacy resources for the most recent International Literacy Day. Well, yeah, with that said, thank you all so much for the engaging discussion and for your wonderful advocacy work and partnership. We're very grateful for you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you all.
Everybody. And we'll share as well. You can reach out to us anytime to share ideas for action blogs. All coalition members and partners, like Krista said, are welcome to share the great work that you're doing on any topic. We're so grateful to you all for joining. And again, thanks to everyone for bringing all of this work together. Looking forward to seeing many of you either in New York or online. And we're grateful to all of you for your fantastic partnership and advocacy and collaboration. We look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.
Thank you all.